The presenting sponsor for OnEducation is Classcraft. We're so excited to announce Classcraft's new story mode, which makes it easy for educators to harness the power of stories. But that's not all. Have you ever wanted to see yourself as a character in a story? Now teachers and students can create their custom game avatars and see them come to life on an augmented reality poster. To learn more about Classcraft's story mode and the new AR experience, simply visit classcraft.com.
Ability of an ARG, when you can live that experience as opposed to just being told it, that's far more powerful.
Welcome to OnEducation, part of the Education Podcast Network. I am Mike Washburn.
And I'm Glen Irvin. Friends, we have an awesome pod for you today. We will discuss the impact of universities using artificial intelligence to select students for admission and the move away from physical textbooks by big book companies. We will debate what the right policy is for students submitting late work. And our guests this week are educators Paul Darvasi and John Fallon.
Whoa, new intro.
Big new intro.
Well, it was just 6 words, but big news. Yeah, huge news. We've joined the Education Podcast Network. We have lots of friends there. We were glad to make it happen. It took a little while, but we're in. It's exciting.
Yeah, I mean, that if you take a look at the list of the Education Podcast Network, it's ridiculous, amazing educators and their podcasts, including Jennifer Gonzalez and who else? Matt Miller.
Miller.
I mean, there's just so many great podcasts on there. So to be part of that group is so fantastic.
So, I mean, for us, it's just another way for us to reach new people, ideally. I figure, when people are looking for education podcasts, the Education Podcast Network might be one of the first places they would look. So if we're on that list, then that gives us a little more visibility. Obviously, it's nice that we have the potential to be shared by other people in the network and make connections there. And for people who may not have listened to a lot of other education podcasts, well, I mean, in our mind, other than a few handful of others who aren't in the network, this is kind of the list of some of the best education podcasts out there. So if you are looking for a place to go for new podcasts, this is probably where it's at, right?
Yeah, and I mean, unfortunately, iTunes is so populated, on there. If you sort by education, it's just not really education related.
There's a lot of garbage
podcasts, and so some people are just basically saying that they're education related, but they're really not. And so it's a really tough place to go ahead and find and locate a education podcast. And this is the place, man. This is a variety platter of all kinds of things, and they're all really, really solid podcasts and some really amazing podcasts. So we're super happy to join them.
Not a lot is going to change. I mean, you heard the new intro bit there, and then in the outro there'll be a little bit more of a substantive mentioning of the Education Podcast Network, but other than that, all of our information will be up on that site, and we've added some stuff to our site about the Education Podcast Network. So this is just really exciting, just another way for us to grow and gain more listeners and develop more of a community, which is what we're trying to do.
Absolutely.
So San Diego Comic-Con, I think, is either just wrapped up or is about to wrap up. And basically, this is one of those things that breaks the internet on a daily basis with, whatever new announcement is coming out. The other day, it was the next phase of the Marvel Universe's, movies and when they're coming out. But the other day, probably about 3 or 4 days ago, it was the dropping of the first real full-length Picard trailer. And we're both kind of giant Trekkies, or big Trekkies at least. I'm a giant Trekkie. I'd classify myself. This trailer was friggin' amazing.
I really like the entire concept of where they're taking this storyline. and I'm so happy that it's not your typical Star Trek series, because I don't know how that would have went. So if they would have just followed the same model, which if you don't watch Star Trek, there's a lot of modeling. One series follows the next series, and there is something to that kind of sticks to the original, but especially like the Next Generation type of things, that the way that they tell the stories, the concepts, the way that the adventures go, etc. So this seems to take it on a completely new direction, but yet still has all of our favorite characters brought back for us, and then in a completely new way. And my goodness, I think it's only like a 3-minute trailer, and there's a lot of information there and a lot of mystery to it too. So that's really, really exciting for all of us super nerds.
There's a lot of stuff in the trailer, like you just said. So so if you haven't watched it, watch it. We'll put it in the show notes. You can watch it, and then you can come back and listen. Pause it now, go watch it, and then come back and let me ask this question. And I don't know if you even thought we're going this direction with this thought, but the young woman at the start that they is like the focus of the first few seconds of the trailer. Is that Tasha Yar?
I'm not sure. I mean, when I just saw you putting that on here, it could be. I mean, that would probably fit this whole entire thing. But I do know, though, man, there's so many great characters coming back. I mean, just having Data back on this thing, and then having some characters that are from different shows. So there was Seven of Nine, who is a completely different series, and she shows up as far as on this trailer. And so, I mean, again, if you're a Star Trek person, you can't wait till 2020. And then, of course,
it was a smorgasbord.
They tell us not till 2020, and then everybody's just like, God, we're all sad, but it'll be amazing.
So they didn't mention, or it wasn't shown in the trailer at all, but I know that it's been confirmed now that Riker is going to be appearing in episodes as Riker, but that Jonathan Frakes is directing some of the episodes. Mm-hmm. He's directed a ton of Star Trek, so not just playing Riker, but especially post Next Generation. He probably directed 10 or 15 Deep Space Nine episodes. He directed a whole bunch of Voyager, directed a whole bunch of other episodes. And I think he's directed one episode of Discovery. So, like, he's directing a lot of Star Trek. Obviously, he's, a well-versed person in this universe. And Deanna Troi is also going to be on the show. As Counselor Deanna Troi. So it's like it is literally
reunion.
Like getting the band back together, of Next Generation, which is exciting. Now, I loved Discovery. I know that there are people that didn't. I think Discovery is awesome. I think they're telling amazing stories, and it also does not follow the mold of the typical Star Trek pattern that for sure was in, Next Generation and Voyager were definitely had a very patterned style. Mm-hmm. And Discovery does not fit a pattern like that at all either. So, and the cinematics and the camera effects and all of the cinematography of the trailer, everything was just awesome.
Yeah.
So
we're excited.
Obviously,
when it comes out, we're going to talk about this. So get ready for the nerds to come back in 2020 whenever they pull out these episodes, because we're going to be watching these.
We'll have a play-by-play of Star Trek. We'll have a OnEducation presents Star Trek Picard.
we just break down the episodes.
Super cool.
Yeah,
so we're obviously very, very excited, and it'll be sweet. A couple articles that we came across over the last week or so. This one in Fast Company that'll be in the show notes about schools using AI to decide who gets in. What do you think about using a computer to run admissions?
Horrible idea.
Okay.
I mean, I could just first of all, the admissions process we already know is super flawed. And part of the reason why it's super flawed is because of the ability for people to game the system. And the way that you game a system is one of the easiest ways is by manipulating test scores, either having someone else take the test for you, or you do something as far as being able to do something, within the test scores themselves. And we've basically decided, I mean, we've thought about it, and some major universities have gone in this direction, where the test scores aren't the end all. Actually, they are just one of the many measures. And those other measures are basically like personal interviews, really kind of getting to know the student, whether or not they're qualified to be able to fit into this. And so I just don't see artificial intelligence with just basically a data analysis of a person, of a student, being able to tell whether a student will, number one, be successful in the college process, but also be a contributor to their university setting. That's what you would want, someone that can come in and step into roles and really lift up the university. And I seriously doubt you can find that on any kind of data analysis that an artificial intelligence system would do. Seems like, what this seems like is a way to save money. So you have a recruit.
Oh, for sure.
You have a team of people basically who are part of your admissions team. And my goodness, talk about being able to cut a bunch of jobs in that area of a bunch of people who actually sort through applications and read through them and discuss and do all the processes that they do at universities. And then having a computer just basically do that based solely on information that can be inputted. So, I mean, we're talking about test scores. I don't know what else you could talk about. I mean, GPA, et cetera, where you went to university or high school or whatever. But most of the data there, I hate this idea. I like some other artificial intelligence ideas. This idea is like, ugh. Yeah. What do you think?
So, I mean, I guess the one thing that would be an advantage is that it does potentially, assuming that there's not bias built into the algorithm, it reduces the bias from the people making the decisions. That's one of the big features of this that they're claiming, is that, we've seen this scandal where people were bought off basically to let people into their schools. Well, I mean, you can't buy off a computer program. Now, that being said,
you can manipulate it.
You have to you have to ensure that there's not bias cooked into the system itself. That's my biggest concern. My biggest concern is that you could have schools that say we only want middle class to wealthy white families from the suburbs of Chicago. That is like our target market. And so you give extra kind of points or whatever in the algorithm for, white people from the suburbs of Chicago that have household incomes over $150,000 or $200,000, and you could cook that right into your system so that you're already giving people who would have potential and know they could do well in university, already putting them at a disadvantage because the algorithm basically automatically dismisses you because you don't meet that sort of criteria. Yeah. That's the super big danger of a system that doesn't have a personal touch to it at all.
And I was thinking, it says, I mean, within the article, you should go ahead and read it. The creator of the startup, basically says that we can't trust humans, the human bias. We're going to trust this artificial intelligence and that type of thing. So I have a hard time with that. I mean, I understand there is human bias in a lot of different things, in a lot of aspects. But would you trust the humans in admissions, or where are you going to trust this program that's created? And that's, for me, it's super hard, especially because there are so many aspects of admissions that shouldn't not be based upon a pure test score. And I just named some of them, especially those types of things that involve you personally having to step out, whether it be a formal interview, an online type of interview, where they get to actually talk to you, just like an interview for a job. You can put whatever you want on an application, and it might get you to the next step to be able to get to the interview. Once you hear someone talk at an interview, that's where the decision is made. Doesn't even matter if on paper this person looks amazing. Talking to them and saying, is this going to be part of our organization? In this case, a university. Is this a person that's going to contribute? We get something, a feeling off of you. That's an important part of I think of life, interviewing through processes, whether they be about jobs or university settings, because you can get a better feel for somebody rather than just kind of some statistical stuff on paper.
One of the interesting parts in this article talks about, so we've talked about something like self-segregation before, how communities move into communities that are similar to them, whether this be race or whatever, wealth. For example, fenced off school districts with like one public school and one high school, for wealthy people, basically to create their own little school board. This stuff happens all the time. So the problem, it's a problem, and they've also addressed it as a feature of the system where, if you specify a zip code, for example, and that zip code happens to be in a neighborhood, it's supposed to flag it as, hey, you're specifically targeting a neighborhood that is self-segregated in one way, shape, or form. That could inject bias into your applications. Or the other one is flagging for things like personal relationships and stuff like that. It seems like they've thought of a lot of these things. I think that it's worth giving it a shot and seeing, how it actually works in a couple of years. I'd be interested in knowing, where we're at 3 or 4 years from now with this, because it's a little early to pass, brutal judgment on something like this, but there is something to be said for the personal touch, the being able to talk to a person face to face and learning about who they are and what they would bring to your school and the future potential that they have as a student. There's nothing better than that, and no machine can assess that. This other article that came up, not an article, sorry, it was a Twitter post from Jennifer Gonzalez, and
who is amazing,
who is amazing, and actually is a podcast on the Education Podcast Network. So there you go.
Pedagogy. There you go.
We're already plugging
exactly.
And it's talking about teachers struggling with handing in late work, whether you deduct points, how to keep track. And kind of letting her know what works. This is going to make a great question on Chat on Education. We'll be putting that out there because I'd love to know too. And this is, to be honest, this is something I struggled with, and probably something as I'm reflecting on my past. And actually, I mentioned this I think it was on the TLAP chat, or it might have been another chat last week. And I talked about how I had students who failed my class, and I allowed that to happen, and I almost and I didn't have a problem with it at all. And I'm rethinking whether that was a good thing or not. As I'm sitting here reflecting on my experiences as a classroom teacher. Did you deduct for late work as a Spanish teacher?
And it is this along with just grading in general, I think are the things that really burn at your soul as a teacher, because it's different. This along maybe classroom management is another aspect of this, because there's no easy solution to this. There is no one right answer. So there's a lot of things that people are responding with on Jennifer Gonzalez's post here that are actually really, really good ideas. And I'd like to hear more of other people that do these kinds of things. For example, where a student would, if they submitted something late, they could go ahead and say they could turn in a form and maybe even have their parents sign the form. I saw a couple of people talk about this and basically say, hey, I missed this due date, especially when we're talking about the things that would really bother me is those summative things. a big project like in your class. I mean, what are you going to do with the student that doesn't actually do the thing that you've been working on the whole entire time and turn it in by the date that it's actually due? In this case, they have this form where basically you're requesting an extension and I plan to turn this in and here's why it's late. And kind of make a more human aspect of this, or a more human part of this conversation. And this is the type of stuff that actually is allowed at university settings. So I'm all for those kind of solutions where you're like, okay, something happened, let's come up with a solution so that we can move forward. And again, so you don't fail the class, just like you just finished describing, because that's horrible. I mean, what a horrible feeling. You're like, oh, this kid just didn't pass. But really, I don't even know if they actually learned anything because they just didn't submit the thing, whatever that was,
try.
you know? Yeah.
I can honestly say the kids who failed my class were given opportunity upon opportunity upon opportunity upon opportunity to submit their work, to come after class. I spoke to their I would have spoken to their parents multiple times. I would have sat with them, and like I would have done everything I thought I needed to do in order to have a student be successful.
Yeah.
Like I wouldn't fail a kid out of pride or out of look at the power that I wield.
No.
You know, I'm not that type of person. There are those types of people. I'm not one of those types of people.
And I think those people are far and few between. I think
very
both of
few.
us really
I would
struggle with
never
that concept of like, we're exactly like you, where you're like, we need something. You need that artifact of learning. You need to get it in. I did have one time, Mike, that I wanted to share where a year I took on the thing where I was like, okay, I'm not going to have any due dates. Okay. So you could turn in all of your stuff at the end of the semester and it would still count. For the most part, all of my students still followed the exact same thing. I would say 80%, maybe higher, 90% of my students just did what they were supposed to do on a timely basis. But there was some students who at the end did turn in a whole bunch of stuff. And it really tore at me. I was like, this was a bad decision. And I felt bad for the students who had actually done all the work up to that point. I felt bad for myself and my family because now I had to grade all of this stuff and give it a fair chance as far as did they actually pick up these things? What were those things? And a lot of times that's just not realistic. Just because we need to know, we need timely data to be able to make adjustments to our teaching, et cetera. We talk about that all the time, formative assessment, and then change our teaching to fit and adjust where we need to be moving with our students, differentiate for them. But if we don't find out all of that until the very end, you really can't do any of that adjustment. Right. You can't do any of that stuff. So that actually blew up in my face. And I was, I tried a lot of things while I was teaching. I could tell you that one for myself, it just didn't work out. I know for some people, they actually do have systems like that. And that kind of feels like this, where if we don't have a due date as humans, are we less likely to go ahead and just turn something in? Do we need that due date for some of us to be able to compel us to be like, oh, I need to prioritize this. We prioritize stuff all the time in life.
Yeah.
Stuff that's on our calendar, stuff that's here, and we need to put them into the right things. If it's not on your calendar, if it's not on your to-do list, do you ever just do it? So that's the biggest question here. And that's, I'm going to love to hear what people have to say on chat on education about this specific thing, because it's super complex and it really burns at our souls as teachers.
Yeah, there's definitely not one. I don't feel like there's a good answer. I feel like there are multiple good answers, I guess, is what I'm actually trying to say, is that there's not one be-all and end-all answer to this, and it depends on so many things. There was someone who posted a couple people actually in this chat posted things like a late work explanation form that I've actually pulled out of the chat, and I'll link it in the show notes so that you can download it if you want to use it. I love the accountability piece of having students hand things in on time and be responsible for their work and doing it when it needed to be done. I mean, you can frame it in a couple different ways. I mean, even as a teacher, your time has value. And if you are assessing, something that was due 3 months ago and you have to go back out and get all the things that you need to do this or whatever. I mean, there's a pattern and a rhythm to the school year that's disrupted by late work. And, so there's lots and lots of things to talk about when it's related to this. And it's not as easy as, who cares when kids hand things in? It's all about mastery. I mean, that sounds great. I love it. That's a nice thing to put on the inside of a book about hashtag it's for the kids or whatever.
I love all kids.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Kids are awesome.
But the practicality of that, man,
kids.
It is can get really ugly. And I'm telling you right now too, that some students and their parents, and who could blame them, will really resent you. Those kids that actually did do what they were supposed to do in timely manner and did the stuff, whatever it might be, there can be some backlash on that too. So that's the reason why this discussion needs to be had, because it's one of those topics that just burns at your soul. It doesn't matter, almost like which decision you decide to make. Almost all of them have the positives and the negatives, that come along with them.
It's complicated.
Yes.
Just like, listen, we wouldn't be having the conversations if they were easy.
No.
So it's complicated, just like everything else, friends. And we have another complicated conversation coming up after the break. When we come back, textbook companies have been facing challenges for a lot of years, and we don't really do them any favors on this show either. And hopefully the beginning of some big changes has just started. So we'll talk about that when we come back next. Stay with us.
OnEducation is brought to you by Pick My Kid. Pick My Kid is an automated dismissal solution that cuts car line time in half. It engages parents with the parent app by being able to change dismissal routines right from their phone. Friends, that means no more front office calls. Pick My Kid is affordable for schools and removes dismissal stress for parents, teachers, and staff. For more information, visit pickmykid.com. That's PIK, mykid.com.
All right, welcome back to the show, everybody. Pearson is a pretty big name in textbooks, and they just announced a couple days ago that they're going to adopt what they call a digital-first approach to updating higher ed course materials. And I'm quoting now, meaning that any revisions or changes to textbook content will happen first in their digital versions. I mean, textbooks have been a racket for a while,
yes,
right?
They have been.
and I mean, I'm not so far out of my time in university to remember spending thousands of dollars on textbooks.
Crazy.
And then, a couple years later, the same textbook revision 2.0 or whatever is $100 more. And they changed, where the periods are in some of the sentences. Updated a couple of the pictures. This is a more modern version of a tent instead of this picture of a tent kind of thing.
Yes, totally. And I mean, even when you get the digital versions, though, Mike, I don't know if you were. I'm sure you were sometimes buying the digital versions of these textbooks. You got to borrow them. You ever do that? You rented them for a year. Or a semester or whatever it might be, it still costs you like $70 or $80.
Or you get the CD. Do you remember when they had CDs in the back of the
CD-ROMs, baby. Yes. We forgot about CD-ROMs.
Oh,
man.
Boy. And then they frame it as being modern, right?
Oh, that's exactly what a lot of this is. And too often we see in these textbooks, we did purchase quite a few at my previous school, digital versions of textbooks. And it's specifically the ones that have to do with math are basically PDF copies of your physical textbook, which is just so stupid and so expensive. I mean, they may say, oh, yeah, well, you get the digital version, blah, blah, blah. It's at cheaper price. But there is no it doesn't have some, our abilities to do things nowadays, as we've talked about in the show, with all kinds of different things, whether it be game-based learning, project-based learning, whatever it might be, in digital versions of things, 3D animations, to be able to kind of immerse us into learning are available for us to be able to do that, and textbook companies to invest in and to be able to include them as part of their books. Yet so often it's the same textbook of a PDF, except it's a PDF copy of a stagnant PDF copy of the book so that you could see it. Many of the students that, at least in my previous district, hated the digital version of things. They wanted the physical textbook. They were like, this is stupid. And we had one-to-one devices. Many educators hate the digital versions of, the aspects of the books themselves, whether it be because they feel, a sense of the physical textbook is something to it, or whatever it might be. It just doesn't feel like you're getting that much for it. So I hope that they're moving past that, and really that these digital textbooks become immersive environments for learning rather than just same old, that's been produced for, the last however many years the racket of textbook companies has been going, which has been a lot of years.
The irony of this is that the use of print textbooks, well, there's two ironies. First off, and one of them we've already mentioned, that this isn't so much about it being better for learners as it is being better for Pearson to save money.
Yes.
Pearson is shedding jobs and revenue like it's crazy. So people are catching up to the idea that, they're adding limited value to what is happening in the class. But the second irony is actually worse, and that's that the driver for the continued desire for print books is faculty. It's not the students, and it's not the need for a better learning situation or knowledge acquisition. It's because there are still thousands and thousands of professors out there that live in the Stone Ages and want to hand out textbooks. I don't know what the ultimate driver of something like this, whether it's because it's their buddies that write the textbooks and they get cuts. I mean, there is some of that. There is some motivation to selling books in this industry for sure. We know people who have books being offered in school courses. So, I mean, it's part of it, but I'll tell you, it's just like everything else we've just said today. We've said it a million times today. It's complicated, friends.
Yeah.
But the idea that faculty are the driver for print books is just kind of blows my mind a little bit.
The great stories that I like to tell as far as in K through 12 education are districts that now it's been 6 to 8 years now that have moved away from textbook companies and moved towards open education resources, some of which they've actually created. There's a school in Byron, Minnesota, in southeastern Minnesota, who basically is at the forefront of flipped education for math classrooms. And what they did is said, we can't actually afford these new textbooks, nor do we actually want to invest our monies into them. Can't we just develop our own curriculum with the state standards there, and then develop key videos and resources for our students that actually teach towards these specific things? And they made it happen, and they've continued to make it happen. And guess what? Each year they upgrade their version. So they're not using the same old thing they used 8 years ago. They continue to upgrade it and key in on the things that work and don't work, and have done an amazing job. Now that's specifically in mathematics. I wonder if there's other examples out there that have, things as far as in the sciences. I know that, the open education resources in sciences are actually growing a lot too.
Sure.
And CK12 is a fantastic company that gives you all kinds of open resources there. I just wonder if there's some really good stories out there of people who said, we can go with the alternative to the big textbook company, and it's actually being successful. Our students are still doing well on whatever types of, assessments that are being given. And we don't need these specific textbooks from these big book companies and these huge investments in these things, whether it be digital or physical, we can create our own. So that conversation, that really fascinates me. And I want to make sure we reach out to people who are doing it so that more people can connect to them. Like, how do you do this? How do you basically circumvent Pearson and then get to a place where you can just create the materials, or you can use them from open resources and then still have a high quality of resource. That's the biggest concern, I think, for teachers. They want to make sure we have high quality resources.
So, I mean, I this is a fight for survival for Pearson. This is them fighting back, and nothing should surprise you about this transition. But $1.3 billion in revenue in 2018.
Whoa.
Let's hope that the pressure that comes from this need to shift brings about some need or some innovation in ways. And hey guys, use the money to do actual cool stuff, not just take your textbooks, photocopy them, and put them in PDFs, and then say, "Hey, look at us going digital."
Yes.
I'm not going to call it tough love because it's not love necessarily, but I'm going to say, this. Hopefully, you learn that you can't just shove stuff out into the world and say, "Look at us," and here it is. Digital or not, we talk a million times about games-based learning done by people who aren't delivering it properly, or can't do it right, or don't get a PD in it, or it's still not a good learning experience. Well, listen, newsflash, but a digital textbook is still a friggin' textbook, guys. So take that 1.3 billion and put it into some. Hey, I'll help. I'm sure Glenn will help too, right? But and we have friends. Our squad is large and talented. So get in touch if you need somewhere to spend some of that sweet textbook money. Because photocopying your sheets and then putting them in PDFs, and then saying we're going to update them now all the time. Well. I mean, that's just, frankly, it's just not good enough.
Nope.
When we come back, we're going to be joined by our good friends, Paul Darvasi and John Fallon, so stay with us.
OnEducation is brought to you by Tailor-Ed. As teachers, meeting the needs of each and every student in today's classroom is time-consuming, complicated, and overwhelming. Tailor-Ed makes differentiation in math effortless through curated resources, smart student grouping, and student insights beyond proficiency. Sign up today using the promo code OnEducation and receive 3 months on us. Visit tailor-ed.com for more information.
All right, welcome back to the podcast, everyone. One of our next guests gets name dropped in about half the episodes. Paul Darvasi is an author, speaker, and teacher from Toronto, Ontario, practically my neighbor. And as well, he is the co-author of an amazing alternate reality game for students based on digital citizenship and privacy with our other guest, John Fallon. John is a teacher, curriculum developer, and game designer from Connecticut. Welcome to the show, fellas.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad to finally be on. Big fan.
So why don't we do quick introductions just in case nobody has met you guys or been introduced to you before. So go ahead. Why don't we start with Paul and then we'll do John.
Sure. Thanks, Mike. I'm a high school English and media studies teacher from Toronto, Ontario. And I am doing lots of work with games. I incorporate them, incorporate commercial video games into classrooms. I design alternate reality games, and I write and speak about games and learning and culture.
Yep, my name is John Fallon. I'm an English teacher out of Fairfield, Connecticut. I also design alternate reality games, one of them with Paul, and I, as an English teacher, also use a lot of commercial video games, narrative video games in class to study as text. And yep, I tend to speak a few times a year about games and learning of different types.
So, guys, a lot of our audience probably has no idea what alternate reality game even means. And so for our audience that may have not ever heard of this, can you give us like the 101 of alternate reality games and maybe even how they're used in education?
Yeah, so an alternate reality game is an immersive game that sort of blends the digital with the real world. And players who are involved in these games are accessing the narrative through all types of different places. It could be posters, it could be false websites, getting phone calls in the middle of the night. So it's essentially almost like playing a video game in the real world. And in some cases, if they're well done, the boundaries between the real world and the game should be fairly blurry.
Yeah, it's definitely a type of game that uses real world platforms. So if you can communicate with it in real life, instant messages, websites, social media, envelopes taped under desks in the classroom, you can use it as part of the game. And Paul's right. A big part of it, of the fun of playing these games is it's very easy to kind of pretend that it's actually happening in the real world, and that blurriness of the real and the fiction of the game is definitely a big draw of it.
John, how did you guys meet? So I think that this is a neat story, and this kind of leads us into the next question I'll ask. But how did you and Paul get together to do what we're going to talk about here, this game that you guys made?
Yeah, because it's definitely directly related to alternate reality games. So, coming up on 7 years or so, something like that. We both had attended the Games and Education conference, which is actually coming up in August 19th and 20th. And I had just signed up because I had done this alternate reality game with my students based around the Odyssey. And it was this whole kind of game where I wanted them to get the feeling of solving puzzles and using your wits. So I wanted to simulate that for them. So I had built this thing where they were solving these puzzles and riddles parallel to reading and studying the Odyssey in class. And it was great. And I had just kind of done it in a fit, having seen some alternate reality game puzzles in a different context within an MMO called The Secret World. So that was kind of my initial inspiration, where I realized you could kind of import these puzzles experiences in many different contexts, including the classroom. So I just kind of done it on a whim. And
they built out a huge ARG in advance of the game coming out too.
Mm-hmm.
Like a massive ARG.
Yeah, and I believe they still have a commercial one running called The Secret Watchman, and there's actually another spin-off that they did that's cybersecurity focused called Night Team 4, which I played a little bit, and I've got to go back and check it out. But anyway, I thought it was the only kind of crazy one doing these types of things, and sure enough, I go there, and I'm standing in line by the shuttle, and I'm reading the program, and I see that there's this other guy named Paul Darvasi who did alternate reality games in his English class. I'm like, wow, that looks really interesting. And Paul's sitting right next to me in line for the shuttle. And we instantly clicked. We liked the same literature. We were nerdy about a lot of the same things. And of course, we both were experimenting with this wacky way of doing games in class. And, by the end of the conference, we were already dedicated to trying to figure out a way to do things together.
Very, very cool. So you guys made a game. So you got together and designed a game that kind of surrounds digital citizenship, security, personal safety, kind of online privacy. So Paul, maybe break down the game that you guys made. You guys made this game called Blind Protocol. The steps and the process and kind of what actually happens, like the game itself.
Sure. So John and I, after we realized we had this shared passion and shared kind of intellectual space, decided, well, how can we kind of draw forces and create an alternate reality game that's going to involve both of our schools? And one thing that John and I share in common is that we really were interested in the idea of privacy and surveillance and data mining And we both felt that not enough was being done to prepare kids for the degree of surveillance, corporate, state-sponsored surveillance that's going on in our midst. And it's a very important literacy and the kind of digital literacy repertoire that we felt needed to be attended to. So we combined this idea of wanting to create an alternate reality game between our schools and instructing on privacy and surveillance, and started working on an idea for a game. And it started with a few little seeds, and we also wanted to incorporate an artificial intelligence element. We've spent the better part of 2 years creating documents, having Skype conversations, and working through the details of the game that we eventually launched 2 years later. It was my media studies class and John's English class who would essentially be pitted against each other. And the game is fairly involved. It's fairly complex. It goes on for 30 days. And I think the best way to kind of immerse you into the world of this game is what we call our rabbit hole. It's the kind of opening salvo that lets the kids know that they are now in a completely different space. And the kids are not prepared. They're not told they're going to be playing a game. And in fact, John and I never admit that there's a game going on. Even while we're in the midst of a game, we pretend that we are as much a victim of what's going on as they are, and that we're kind of trying to navigate this really complex situation that evolves over 30 days. So on the first day, I tell my students that we're going to learn about privacy and surveillance from my media studies class. John does the same thing in parallel with his English class. They walk into the classroom. We talk a little bit about privacy and surveillance, and I throw in a TED Talk video. And about halfway through the TED Talk video, I get a phone call, as John also gets a phone call. This is all happening at the same time. And I look very concerned. I say a few things, and then I storm out of the classroom with the video paused and the students mystified as to what is going on. While they're waiting, about 2 minutes after the video's been paused, the video unpauses itself. There's this kind of ruptured screen, this kind of electrified screen, and then there's an alert to check their emails. All of a sudden, the laptops all start flying open because we both have one-to-one laptop schools, and they have an email that's been sent from inside of the school server, but from an entity named Horace. And they don't know if this is a person, an institution. They have no idea. And Horace, the Horace email links them to a video, a very disturbing video, which basically says that they have been watched, that Horace knows everything about them, and that they've now been indoctrinated into a series of events that they have to follow or they have to pursue. And the accompanying email has a binary puzzle where they have to decode binary that leads them to the 4 cardinal points of the school, where they have to find these digital canopic jars, where they put clues together, eventually finding a sarcophagus that's buried in the center of the school. And when they open the sarcophagus, there's a USB stick inside that has a document cache that basically unloads all of the information they need for the next step in the game. John, you want to take over from there for a bit?
Yeah, sure. And so as you might have picked up, the game has this kind of pseudo-Egyptian theme to kind of give it like a cohesive aesthetic. And it's very like cyberpunky where, there's, data forts and jars, but they're really, USB sticks, hidden files, that type of thing. So it's just kind of part of the aesthetic of the game to loop the kids in. And so this kind of first experience is somewhat typical for the ARG experience, because if you're, anyone in the audience is trying to imagine, like, how do you play the game? Well, one of the main challenges and interfaces of an alternate reality game is like kind of like collaborative puzzle solving, where you have this thing that seems completely opaque and kind of unsolvable, and you don't really know what's going on, but gradually the group begins to work their way through it. So as Paul mentioned, there's this binary code, they solve that, there's a riddle, it leads them to one place, and then they realize that, we have actually 4 different variations of the same puzzle, so we're working in different teams to eventually kind of descend on the final puzzle once they put it all together. And and one of the versions I ran is actually under a lunch table in the center of the cafeteria. So I remember, watching from afar as they're all eating lunch, and the student is kind of trying to surreptitiously walk over to a lunch table and is feeling under, and he grabs a manila envelope that's been duct taped there, and then kind of scurries to the corner to unlock it, which kind of had the initial phase of the game. So once they've done that and they've been onboarded, so to speak, into the what we call the program, capital T, capital P. Their next step is a research phase. So Horace, the students don't really know this, and it's only kind of implied through the last version of the game. But he or it is an AI that has gone rogue, and of course, what the AI wants is information. So they get this document that has all these different topics within cybersecurity. Everything from Edward Snowden to data mining, privacy on social media, data breaches, all these different topics that increasingly are in the news every day. Anywhere from political ramifications to personal ones, all these different contexts, and they have to start accumulating information about them. And so once they've accumulated all of these different kind of data points, articles, YouTube videos, under these different tags, they can then move on to the next phase. So it's kind of like this mad rush for information. And then once they have that, then they can begin turning that information into actual artifacts of information. That Paul, you can tell more about the actual artifact phase.
Sure. And John and I very deliberately designed this to work like a video game, in the sense that they have to we designed it to try to create a collective experience and an individual experience. You have to do individual work, but you have to pool your work collectively to achieve a certain threshold, and then that unlocks the next phase. So they're kind of rushing through to get these phases accomplished. And once they have where they've gathered this massive amount of data related to privacy and surveillance, that becomes their kind of pool of resources that they draw from in order to start producing artifacts. And what starts getting revealed between the second and the third phase is that there's this very dramatic moment where this entire time my students have thought that they were the only ones that have been going through this. They have no idea that there's another school, another class, or anything like that. And then all of a sudden there's a reveal where it becomes very apparent that somebody somewhere else in the world, or a group of people somewhere else in the world, have been put through exactly the same steps that they have. And then the game is who can uncover the location and identity of their opponents first. And the first to be uncovered then is the losing team, and the first to uncover is the winning team. Yeah. So in order to do this, John and I found a catalog that was leaked by Edward Snowden that belonged to the NSA, where it was basically all these goodies that the NSA can buy in order to hack computers and listen in on calls. And so we modeled a catalog that was very much like that, where we created about 17 protocols or 18 protocols that our students could buy to open up small windows into their opponent's world. And they buy these by using Bitcoins. Yeah. And the Bitcoins are earned by producing artifacts based on their privacy and surveillance research. So for example, they have a huge catalog of the artifact and the Bitcoin value for each artifact. And they'd say, okay, if you produce a brochure on password protection, we'll pay you 18 Bitcoins. If you produce a poster on CCTV cameras and identity theft, we'll give you 25 Bitcoins. So they would start accumulating Bitcoins, at which point in the fourth phase, they would draw from their bank accounts to buy a certain protocol. One of my favorites is the street sign protocol, which forces your opponent to take a picture of a street sign which is within 2 kilometers or 2 miles of where your institution is.
Yes.
So then you start triangulating from these little kind of breadcrumbs of information, and eventually trying to put it all together to figure out where your opponents are. And what's really awesome about this is, of course, the students don't suspect that their opponents are in another country. They think, oh, it's another classroom in the school, or it's the school down the street. Like they think it's, they're thinking local, not global. So as it starts becoming apparent that this is kind of an international situation. It really kind of, it's a big moment for them, where they're like, wow, it's actually not in our own backyard, it's somewhere else in the world.
Oh, that's so good. So curious about how much you guys had to guide the students, or did you plan for pitfalls or issues as they came up? I mean, there's two of you working towards the thing, so you can kind of bounce ideas off each other as the game was progressing. Was there any, I mean, if someone was trying to do this, I imagine there's points where the students kind of get stuck, or they don't know kind of what to do next. Is that something that happened?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a good kind of headspace that would actually kind of reflect how we saw our role is we were definitely kind of like game masters or dungeon masters, where, we had plans and we had expectations, and they were largely met, but there were definitely times where Paul and I had to kind of improvise and kind of troubleshoot in the moment, but they were relatively minor. And there were definitely things that we looked at right away and we're like, okay, we can fix that next time. That aspect of the game did not work out, and we'll change it. And other times it's just like, it's moments that are true for teaching any unit. You think it's going to work and then it doesn't, because the chemistry of the group is different, or the students are different. So it's definitely one of those things where you do have to think on your feet a little bit. But I would just say that's true of any good dynamic teaching experience. But yeah, Paul and I were in contact pretty much constantly throughout the game. Frantically text messaging each other and comparing how things were, unfolding on either end of the spectrum. But that, to me, that was a lot of fun. That makes it exciting. And I do want to go back to something that Paul said. That was a big thing we got in the data from the students when we got feedback after both times that we ran it. And that was, they really, really liked the artifact creation phase, even though that was what you would kind of like, if you had to point to, like, well, what's the work that they're doing? Like, that's yes. The work, they're creating, a surprising number of them actually chose to do kind of traditional research style papers, because those were weighted very high. If you did that, you were almost done with your Bitcoin requirements. And so, but they actually really enjoyed that. And here's an anecdote that I think kind of reflects that, is because it gave them a lot of freedom and something that they don't usually really get. And so the students were beginning to work on this. I think this was probably the first or second day that they were in this phase. And I had this student, and I kept looking over at him, and he was always kind of looking at other videos or content other than the topic that he had told me he was interested in. I can't remember what it was. It was passwords or maybe some hacker collective. And I walked over and I was, Josh, what are you doing? The clock is ticking. You can't waste time. and he was like, no, I'm sorry, Mr. Fallon, but I can't stop looking at these videos about Bitcoins. It's so interesting, like the real world Bitcoins, like the cryptocurrency. Yeah. And I was like, Josh, you do realize that you could just do a video about Bitcoins, right? He's like, what? I can? Oh, wow. Okay. And then he immediately then started realizing that he actually had that freedom to pursue the direction that he wanted to do. And he ended up creating a very interesting video about Bitcoins. But yeah, so they really responded to having that freedom, that within the umbrella of cybersecurity and privacy and surveillance and technology, they could study and do whatever they want, and also in almost any form that they wanted. And that was a really, I think, valuable learning experience for them. And I should know for the audience, that's something that you could do even without the context of an alternate reality game. Giving students more choice and more freedom, I think is always a win.
Absolutely.
I'm curious about the replayability of this specific game. Can it be done again? I guess depending on the age and grade of the classes that you used it with at your school. I mean, I might be concerned about them sharing, the older kids that have already done it with newer kids that haven't done it yet. But do you guys have enough public resources on what you did that someone else could borrow the idea from you guys to do it? Has that work been done? Have you thought about doing any of that work? I guess that's the first question, and I might lead into something else depending on your answer here.
So it's a very astute question, because the issue is that the win condition for the game is uncovering the opponent's school.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, once we play once, there's an institutional memory that it's the school in Connecticut or the school in Toronto, right? And students talk, right? They're the Borg, like there's a collective kind of consciousness going on there.
Yes.
So John and I knew that we were up against that. So in both of our cases, we played this with students that were either on the verge of graduating. In my case, the grade 11s, and in John's case, the grade 9s, which was the graduating year for his school. So what we would do is we staggered the play every 2 years, and it worked. I mean, with the second time we ran it, there was one older. Both of us had older brothers who had younger brothers in our classes, but they loved the game so much that they didn't want to ruin it for the younger brothers, and actually
really
preserve the sanctity of the game and didn't actually transmit the information. So, and then to the second part of your question. I struggle a lot with our traditional notions of scale and scalability. It's kind of one of one of the things I think about a lot, because it's certainly not a game where, we share the template and any teacher can just pick it up and play it. This is organically grown from a lot of work and passion that John and I put into it. And a lot of it is hinged on our sensibility, our love of ARGs, and this thing that we crafted. And it's certainly not in any easy form. I mean, we could send you all the hundreds of documents and catalogs, and then you could, kind of order that in a way that makes sense for you. But it certainly would be a very different experience.
Yeah.
However, I do feel that of the alternate reality games that I've been involved in designing, and that, John has been involved in designing, this one definitely, with a little help with software and some more deliberate design elements, could be scalable on a more traditional sense. Because one of the faults of the game is that, John and I are invested in making it work. We want our students to have a great experience. But if I was, competing against another class in the States, and I was partisan to my own class, and I knew that John was in Connecticut, I could start dropping little hints like, oh, you may want to look on the Eastern Seaboard, or, whatever the case may be. So, and in order to give my Canadian students the win condition, right, in the sense of competition. So I think if this were to be enacted on a larger scale, there would be almost a clearinghouse that would pair up schools, but the schools wouldn't know, even the teachers involved wouldn't know what the other school or where the other school was, and therefore the teacher could also be involved in the fun of trying to uncover and figure out where their opponents are. And I think that would create a much more interesting version of the game. And then refining some of the design elements, which currently would be a little bit overwhelming or burdensome for the uninitiated teacher, to make it a little bit more fluid and easier to implement.
Yeah, I think one thing that I'll add on to that is that ARGs themselves, when Paul and I present these to other teachers and we talk about it, it can seem intimidating, and in some ways it is, but in some ways it's not. It's very much like a Lego set. Paul and I created this both out of our own interests and our own logistics and our own culture of our schools. And there's a wide scale of complexity and content that you could do with this. So if a teacher is listening to this, they're like, oh man, this sounds like such a great learning experience, but I couldn't do that because of X, Y, and Z. That's okay. What you could do is you could definitely create something smaller that does work in your classroom. And then once you kind of see it in action and you have a little bit of a taste of what the experience is like, it's very easy to build from there, which is exactly what happened with Paul and I. We had our own experiences with ARGs, and then we kind of, joined forces and created this other experience, but it's definitely not the starting point. If you see online, one of those crazy thousands of pieces, custom, Millennium Falcon, Lego constructions, you don't start there with Legos, you try something a little bit smaller. That's definitely the entry point that I would suggest if you kind of get in or find it an exciting prospect for your classroom.
So your next project is the Duplo of ARGs.
You very much could start there if you wanted to, for sure.
So why ARGs? I mean, why you there are tons of resources on digital citizenship, on online safety, on privacy. I mean, Google did this whole like Internet Awesome thing. It's a whole curriculum. You could have taught this a million different ways. What's the big picture of alternate reality games as far as like students go and teaching and learning? Why use this? It's a lot more work than just, cribbing the Google Internet Awesome curriculum and printing out worksheets and why this?
So from the work perspective, ARGs are, at least the ones I've been involved in, are an enormous amount of work, but it's also a labor of love. I love designing. I love creating these experiences, and I think John feels exactly the same way. So the work doesn't feel like work; it just feels like play for us because we're putting together this amazing experience, and we're drawing and from different sources and really trying to create something cohesive. But in more practical terms, as to why would you want to consider this over a more traditional lesson is, first of all, it really draws from a school of experiential learning, right? And in the sense that learning these concepts in the abstract, where, I should be a little more careful with my password, or, I put information out into the world that makes me vulnerable to being found, is kind of something you could, learn in a video and write a test about and move on with your life. But what's interesting about this game is the way the teams have lost when a team has been found out or somebody, it's all because of things that they've left on Facebook or information that's available online. So it's not just it's a marriage of form and content where they're actually seeing in a very tangible and lived way that the information that's out there actually makes them vulnerable, right?
Wow.
So
yes.
So and the other element is, I think it goes back to the rabbit hole that I described earlier, is I walked out of the class 10 minutes after this thing started, as John did, and we never walked back in. So what that tells you is that this thing runs on its own.
Yeah.
And it goes back to something I heard Michelle King say at a conference a few years ago. She said, I don't teach, I create the conditions where learning takes place.
Wow.
And I think a well-designed ARG does exactly that. I mean, there's a lot of talk about not being the sage on the stage and being the guide on the side and student-centered learning. But unfortunately, the lecture style, physical structures of our schools and classrooms, no matter how hard you try, really perpetuate that very teacher-centered dynamic as hard as you try to struggle against it. And there's many people doing really great things that are eroding at that structure. But an ARG is a really highly designed immersive experience, and the design eliminates the teacher as a central role. And I think that when properly done, it just creates a very dynamic, very self-selected learning experience for the students that really starts shifting the teacher from kind of a repository of knowledge to somebody who's an experienced and instructional designer.
Yeah, there's a couple great points that Paul made there that I'd like to add on to. And one is when it comes to the topic of cybersecurity and privacy and surveillance, I hope this doesn't offend any listeners or maybe even previous guests of your podcast, but there's the mythos of like the digital native when it comes to our students is completely false. And a lot of the times that we look at our students and they're Snapchatting, and then they're doing all kinds of things that we look at and we don't understand at all. And we kind of give this idea that, they must really know what they're doing on there. They don't. They're absolutely clueless. They have a few really specific skills that they know well because they've grown up with them. But as far as big picture stuff, they're as clueless as anybody else, but they are far more exposed. So we definitely felt an onus to really make sure that they had a bit more awareness. And Paul's exactly right. It's one thing to be told that your privacy is very fragile and that a group of strangers could find you anywhere in the world with a few breadcrumbs of information. It's another to really experience it. And in both cases of the times that we ran the game, all the teams were always found out. They were, it was just a matter of who was able to expose the other team first. And in both cases, they found out the location of the other team with two pieces of innocuous information. And in one case, it was a street sign and a Google picture of their campus. And they were able
taken by A drone Google picture of the campus.
Well, a fictional drone. It was just like a Google Street Map, screenshot. And in our case, it was a name of a student and, like the colors of their school. So these are things that they are broadcasting all the time about themselves, every time they pick up their phone, every time they open up their laptop. And for them to have like a metaphorical experience of that vulnerability was way more impactful than just being told, hey, be careful online, kids, you're always being spied upon. And I think that's a real game changer, pun intended, of the ability of an ARG. When you can live that experience as opposed to just being told it, that's far more powerful.
So if our audience members are interested in learning more about alternate reality games or just connecting with both of you guys, can you guys give us some of your information, your Twitter, and then maybe websites that they can go to? That you guys both have a website.
So I'm at Paul Darvasi, PaulDarvasi for my Twitter account. My Gmail address is my name at gmail.com. And I have a site called ludiclearning.org, LUDIC learning.org, where I've written about alternate reality games in general, other teachers that are running them, and I've started blogging about my alternate reality game, but my dissertation work derailed me sometime in 2017, but I have every intention of continuing with writing about the ward game. And John also has an excellent site that he's going to tell you about.
Sure, yeah. If you want to find me on Twitter, at John C. Fallon, that's JOHN, C as in Christopher, FALLON, like Jimmy Fallon. And you could also find me at my website, which is thealternateclassroom.org. And I've got a kind of a design diary series of posts that are definitely designed for a teacher who is new to ARGs and is curious about it, where it's actually about my first one with the Odyssey, which is much smaller scale. So it runs you through how I came up with the idea, why I wanted to do it, and as well the creation of several of the puzzles and experiences in it. So you can see that, kind of how that comes together. And it's definitely not as intimidating as it might sound.
Amazing. Paul Darvasi and John Fallon, thanks so much for joining us, guys.
Thank you very, very much.
No, thank you. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks for listening to OnEducation. My name is Glenn Irvin. My co-host is Mike Washburn. OnEducation is part of the Education Podcast Network. You can listen to this show and many others by great educators like Jennifer Gonzalez, Matt Miller, and many more by visiting edupodcastnetwork.com. Want to get in touch with us? Check out our website at oneducationpodcast.com. You can tweet us at oneducationpod. Mike is at Mr. Washburn on Twitter, and I can be found at Irv Spanish. You can find us on Facebook by visiting facebook.com/oneducationpod. We're also on Instagram at OnEducationPod. If you're enjoying the show and think others would too, we would be thrilled if you shared it with them. Please leave us a rating or review in Apple Podcasts or the Google Play Store. When you leave a rating, it gives our rankings a boost. This helps others discover the show. We want to thank our presenting sponsor, Classcraft, for supporting us. Check out classcraft.com/oneducation to learn more about them. Thanks as always for listening, stay awesome, and see you soon.